Hi, and welcome to Quilting with Lori. My name is Lori Dickman. Today I'm going to continue going through my Speedy Solutions patterns book, showing you how to make each of the patterns in this book. We're going to be working on the Illusions pattern today. It's a wonderful quilt. It's really fun to see the movement that is portrayed in this quilt design. I can't wait to show you how to put the block together. This is the pattern in the book. You'll see it in there. It's on page 61. This is a wall quilt, but with all of the patterns in my book, you can make them as large or as small as you want. You could make this simply a runner by making less blocks, or you could make it a queen size quilt by making more blocks. For each of the blocks in the Illusions, it consists of 4 blocks. And down here in the corner, you'll see this is one complete block here. And I'm going to show you that here on my tabletop in just a minute. All right, here at my tabletop, I have a few of the requirements that you need for the blocks laid out, and I'll cover this here in just a moment. This is using your scrap stash. I have pulled for this Illusions quilt, I've pulled my 2.5-inch strip bin, and so these are all strips that are 2.5 inches, and that is what I'm using to make this quilt. So if you have a lot of 2.5-inch strips, this is the quilt for you, a very easy one to put together. I do teach the Speedy Solutions to cut and organize your scrap stash. The techniques that I teach in this book actually are how I produce these patterns in this book. So if you want more information on that, I'll link below this book set out on my website, and you can check that out. But for this block, for each block, and we're going to be making a light and a dark variation. In fact, let me keep this picture open so you can see this as I'm working through it. I think I'll move it to this. There, I think you can see that. So we have, in this case, a blue variation and a red variation. So what I'm doing to create this block is I'm creating a pink variation and a blue variation. Let me show you what I've pulled for that. So I have pulled a light pink and a medium pink 2.5-inch strips, and I've subcut them. I have 2 medium 2.5 by 6.5. I have 2 light 2.5 by 6.5 strips, and these are in the pink family. I have 3 2.5-inch light squares, and I have 3 2.5-inch medium squares. So I just simply took a 2.5-inch strip of fabric and subcut it. 6.5, 2.5, 6.5, 2.5. That's what I'm going to use for the pink portion of this. And then I did the same thing for the blue. So I have 2 6.5 by 2.5-inch rectangles for the dark blue, 3 of the 2.5-inch squares in dark, 3 of the 2.5-inch squares in light blue, and 2 of the rectangles 2.5 by 6.5. So this is what I'm going to use to create the squares. So my block is going to be made up of 4 of these quadrants. So I have 2 darks and 2 lights. And I've laid them out so that the dark encircles the light, or the light encircles the dark. Light encircles the dark, dark encircles the light. And that's how you lay them out. And you're basically just sewing them together into one unit. And of course, this with the seam allowances will end up being 6.5 inches, so that will all go together beautifully. I'm going to sew these units together, and I'll bring them back to the tabletop. So here you see I've sewn these units together in the center, and now I'm just going to sew them together as a block. So I'm going to quickly do that. I'll bring it right back. I have my 4 units put together. This is going to create the complete block. And so there's 2 darks and 2 lights at this point. But now what we're going to do is cut each of these squares on the diagonal. So you want to use a longer ruler. You want to make sure that you're cutting exactly through the points on each of these and cut on the diagonal. So I'm going to go ahead and cut each of those on the diagonal, and then I'm going to show you what we're going to do to put this back together. Before you cut them apart, make sure that you've squared up each of these squares to 6.5 inches. That's important. I forgot to mention that in the previous clip. I pressed everything to the dark, so all of my seam allowances were pressed to the darker side. I squared up each of these little units to 6.5 inches. Then I cut them on the diagonal one time. And what we're going to do is simply sew them together with the opposite value. And you know, I think I want to flip these around so they're kind of, I guess you can flip them around any way you want, but here we go. So there is one variation of how you could lay it out. So you're simply sewing the lighter value with the darker value. And here again, the lighter value with the darker value. This makes a fabulous quilt that can be very, very scrappy when each and every block is made up of 2.5-inch strips from your scrap stash. Now you're going to carefully pin them together, and I start in the middle and make sure that those seam allowances are butted up in there, and then I pin the outside. I do pin all the way across, and then you're going to stitch 1/4 inch. You want to use a leader and an ender to help you get onto that point, and then stitch 1/4 inch down the side. And I'll do it in assembly line, but let me show you what I'm referring to. So I'm trying to butt up those seams right there to make sure that this side doesn't nest, but this side will nest. And then I'm going to pin those, and then I'll pin on the outside edges as well, so that everything stays nicely where it should stay, and then I can take it to my machine and sew it. So let me get those sewn together, and I'll bring this back to the tabletop. When I'm referring to a leader, I'm just talking about a piece of fabric at the beginning, so you're going to put that under your machine and you're going to start sewing on that little scrap of fabric, and that will help you to very easily get onto that point without having it all bunch up in your machine. So this is a leader because it's leading your machine onto that seam allowance there. So I have sewn that. I'm going to get rid of my leader now, and we'll open it up. And there we have it. So we're going to get that pressed, and then we're going to square them up, and I'll show you how we're going to do that here in just a minute. So there is one that is finished, and I'm going to sew the other 3 units, and I'll be right back. So I've laid out each of the squares, or each of the quadrants for the block, so that they're actually on the diagonal. That's how the pattern calls for it. But you can do whatever you want. This is your quilt, so have fun. I think I originally might have had it like that with all the lighter things on the center. You could place them with all the darker diagonals in the center. And then, of course, with every block that you add, you're going to have more lights and darks and so forth. So have fun. I would recommend using a design wall and create a design that way. So let's see, I am going to go ahead and use, do I have this correct? I think it has to go like that. There we go. So mine is going sort of in a pinwheel, if you will. So that's how I'm going to go ahead and put mine together. Each of these little squares now needs to be squared up to 6 inches. And you can use, the instructions call for a 6.5-inch ruler, which is very convenient, or if you have just a 6-inch ruler, a square, that will work as well. Basically what you're doing, let me move some of this out of the way here. You definitely want to line up the 45-degree line on the ruler. In fact, let me get you a little closer here so you can see what I'm doing. You want to line up that 45-degree line on the ruler on that seam line there. And then you want to center, there's a 2-inch square that the ruler creates in the center on either the 6.5 or the 6. There's a 2-inch square. Center that square as well as the diagonal line. So there's about, less than 1/4 inch all the way around it. And then you can go ahead and trim it up. Each of these little units now needs to be trimmed to 6 inches square. 6, 6, 6, and 6. So that's what we need to get them squared up to. I'm going to go ahead and get that done. And then I'm just going to sew the block together. It's a 4-patch, and I'm going to sew mine together in this pinwheel variation. Here is the block. I've laid mine out in the pinwheel formation. I love the block. It is really a fun and fast block to make. And I simply use the Omnigrid ruler. You can use a 6-inch or a 6.5-inch, whichever you might have in your stock. The block itself is the block itself is 11.5 inches right now. It will finish in the quilt at 11 inches when it's in the quilt. And here is a picture of a sample of what the quilt can look like. This is simply a wall quilt, but you could make this as large as you'd like by just making more blocks. Wouldn't it be fun to go through your scrap stash and your 2.5-inch bins and just have fun putting together complementary blocks like this? And so what I've done here, I've gathered some more, and I've started just the same way I started with this. I've got the gold and the blue here. I've got a total of 4 rectangles and a total of 6 squares, a total of 4 rectangles and a total of 6 squares. And this all came from my 2.5-inch bin. So every single block you put together could be real scrappy. Just make sure that you're using some complementary or contrasting so that there's a darker and a lighter that really makes a statement when you put the block together. I've been having fun going through and showing you how to make the different blocks that are in this patterns book. And again, I will link this out on my website. You'll see that in the description box below. I'll also link the tutorial that teaches you how to scrap up your stash. I've got a tutorial that goes with this book, so I'll link that below as well if you want to watch that, if you haven't gotten your scrap stash cut, sorted, organized, and ready to use. And hopefully you're enjoying these videos. Please let me know what patterns you're planning to make, and if you're going to be using your scrap stash or if you're going to be using yardage. Some people prefer to just purchase yardage in their favorite themes or fabric lines and have fun with that. If you do have a lot of 2.5-inch strips in your stash, this quilt pattern is a great one to make up a beautiful scrappy quilt, or a number of beautiful scrappy quilts. So have fun with it. I hope that you'll enjoy it. What I'm going to do now is take the camera up to the wall there, and I'm going to show you some close-ups on how I quilted this quilt so that you'll have some ideas on how to accomplish that. And you can maybe pause the video and take some snapshots of it, and maybe that will help you as you're going through and quilting your quilt. All right, for the border, I simply did more of a piano key, just straight stitching for that small border. It's probably about an inch, no, I'd say maybe 3/4 of an inch spacing for all of that piano key stitching. That was very fast and easy. And then I simply did some feathers in each of the blocks. I just made a stem that came around like this, and then I did all of my feathers. I simply outlined the half square triangle on the inside. And so that is how I did the quilting on this Illusions quilt. And if you look, in fact, if you wanted to do the stems really easily, you can start in one corner and just kind of go all the way across. And you can do that with a lot of this, is going either horizontally or vertically, and then come back and fill in your feathers. So that is how I quilted it. Very simple, not too much to it, but that is the Illusions quilt, and I just love this pattern. I love the movement in the pattern. Thank you so much for joining me today as I helped to show you how to make that Illusions quilt block. And I hope I'll see many of you on Monday night, March 11. I do start my free Zoom mystery quilt class at that time. I'll have the registration link below. I think I'm going to have a couple of classes Monday night. We've got so many people registered. So I will have the first one at 7 p.m. Central Time, and the second one will be at 8 p.m. Central Time. So if you can't get on at 7 p.m. Central Time on Monday, March 11, just come back and jump on at 8 o'clock. And I'll be covering everything that we're going to be doing for the mystery quilt class. I will also have a complete tutorial out on my YouTube channel on that day. So if you miss the class entirely, no worries. You'll get to see the class on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining me today on Quilting with Lori. Again, my name is Lori Dickman. If you do like the content that I provide, please don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment below. I love to read the comments from my viewers. Thank you so much, and we will see you soon. I've got so much more in store for you, so come on back soon. Thanks a lot. Have a great day, and happy quilting.